panelists, please. Thank you so much for being here today.
Thank you. Okay, well, thank you everyone for being here, and I will let my colleagues to present themselves. Owen, can you start, please?
I'm Owen Reynolds from Expon Capital, based in Luxembourg, but we invest across the U.S., across Europe, the U.S., and Israel. And we invest in companies with a massive transformative purpose, and we use the UN Sustainable Development Goals as a part of that purpose. My background before investing was as an energy regulator for the U.S. Department of Energy. So have a good background in watching markets, and then now get to participate at the early stage of development.
Hi, I'm Jeff Char. I'm based in Tokyo, Japan. I'm currently running 2 energy startup companies, one in Japan and one in Singapore. Prior to that, I ran the corporate venture capital team at Tokyo Electric Power.
Okay,
Hello, everybody. I'm José. I'm an entrepreneur. I've been linked with solar for almost 15 years, mainly at the beginning in large scale with a company called Fotovatio, and now more focused to rooftop to distributed generation in a company called Powen.
Okay, well, as we are going to talk about the clean energy revolution, everyone is listening today about the energy transition. But energy transition today also has a lot of support from governments and society as well. It's very challenging, and I would like to listen to the vision of the 3 of you. We are going to start by Jeffrey, who has been advisor, investor, and also CEO of multiple startups in the energy sector. So what do you find more challenging?
So I think it really depends on the market that you're looking at. Again, one of my companies is based in Japan, and so Japan, like Spain, is a developed economy. We've already built out the grid infrastructure, and so integrating renewables is always viewed at, from a paradigm of an existing grid. My other company, Sogo, is based in Singapore, but we're focusing on electrifying off-grid communities in Asia. And so in those situations, basically the communities don't have a grid. There's no grid that exists. And so you're looking at things from a kind of a greenfield, and you don't have the regulations, you don't have the existing infrastructure, and so it's a much different equation. So it really depends, I think, on whether you're looking from that paradigm or whether you're looking from a developed economy paradigm.
Mm-hmm. Okay, and in this context, are you finding like today, for example, storage is affordable, or which kind of technologies are you looking for in order to implement in Sogo?
Yeah. So again, I think this is true for all economies that are trying to increase renewables, especially when you've got wind or solar and it's intermittent. So storage is a very important piece of that puzzle. And solves those problems. Right now, though, storage still is expensive, by and large, especially when you talk, battery storage is still quite expensive. And in Japan, for example, where I'm operating, right now we have a solar offering for homes, but we don't yet offer battery storage. And that's because the cost of the battery is about twice the price of the international price. So the cost of the same battery, if you buy it in Japan versus if you buy it outside of Japan, is about double. And so that's just not tenable. However, the trend is coming down, right? So even though it's double the international price, it's much lower than it used to be, and it continues to get cheaper. So we're doing a proof of concept right now with, for example, the University of Tokyo and Toyota, where we can do vehicle to home or vehicle to grid. Those are potential uses of storage where you're not buying the battery as a battery, you're buying it for something else and it already exists, and so you can make use of it. But if you're just going out to buy storage, it's still very expensive. Mm-hmm. The complete opposite is in the emerging economies, and in those situations, again, it depends on the country. Some countries are still using like lead-acid batteries. And so they have these large panels, and they waste a lot of the energy because the battery can't store much. And there are other countries that have a much kind of tighter fit sold as a kit with a small lithium-ion battery and panels. And those tend to have a smaller panel, and the batteries are, I guess, right-sized for it.
Continuing with this conversation, José, you are an entrepreneur and have experience for the last 15 years in solar business, and you have been first developing large-scale utility projects, and now you have kind of pivoted to the small scale. So I would like to listen to your vision of the energy transition and what you have seen in this past 15 years.
Okay, thank you very much, Maria. The first thing I would like to say is that we are right now in the middle of an energy transition, right? Today we can say that we go from a system that is a very typical generation, transport, and distributed, and then you have the customer at the end. It's a one-direction system. And today everything is changing. The world is changing. We have a few factors that make this happen. The first, we have technological factors. We have solar, we have storage, and we have electric vehicle. With these three things, you can live, because you can generate your own electricity, you can storage and use it whenever you want, and then you can move. And this today is possible, technically. The only thing we need to understand is really the cost and the space we have to do this. The second thing is changing is that the people really is getting much more involved in the environment ideas. There is a commitment with the environment. And secondly, people like to control things. They like to self-manage things. I will always say that today no one asks their assistant for take a taxi. They just take an Uber. No? So these two things are changing the electricity system as we are used to. The electricity, as we think we are going to face, is a much more complex, where the same person plays different roles. You generate electricity, you buy electricity, you charge your car, you storage, you sell it whenever you want. So it's a multilinear system. And this is the changing we are seeing today. So the first thing I say after my 15 years of experience is when you start to talk about these type of things, normally this happened much earlier than everybody thinks. When we started in solar, 2005, and we developed a PV plant, no one thought that this cost reduction was going to happen. I give you one example, very simple. A solar panel, similar to this TV, the first one I bought, it cost me $1,600. This panel. Today you can buy it with $80. This is a reality. This is happening today. So with all this, I think it's going to happen the same with storage, with batteries. The cost is the reduction of cost is happening today 50% every year. So I think in 3-4 years, we are going to be able to generate solar and storage cheaper than any other technology. So this is a very important concept. The second thing I always find when something of this is happening, a change, a transition, is that big companies try to say that easy things are not going to happen. Simple things. When we started with solar, we started with PV. We constructed the biggest solar plant in the world in 2006. And we had no idea of what a kilowatt hour was. I don't know today what a kilowatt hour is. I think it's a cable with something, I don't know. But we did it. And when we started, everybody said, no, it's impossible. You cannot generate electricity in a country. The sustainability of the electricity system is going to die. It's impossible. And we say, no, it's very simple. You put one module, another module, another module, and then you generate electricity. And then if you want, you store it. No, they wanted complex plan. And you know why? Because it's their barrier. It's the only way they can survive, saying to people that things need to happen in a complex way. So that's why, going to your point, Maria, simplicity and it will come earlier than everybody thinks.
Okay, Owen, you at Expon are looking of kind of impact investments, no? So in the, let's say, the sustainability vertical, which kind of investments are you looking for, or which have you done?
So we're a bit odd in the sense that we don't really think of ourselves as impact investors, but we look at the impact, it is true, of the way companies are going to affect a lot of different markets. So whether it's energy or otherwise, and the UN Sustainable Development Goals are a pretty diverse set of 17 goals that include the kind of obvious things like clean water, clean air, but there's also things like economic growth and productivity and infrastructure build out, and all of those things are really match well with the VC funding strategy and the profiles of companies that we're looking for. So we've done a couple different companies that are like very clearly aligned with with energy efficiency. Pliops comes to mind. It's an Israeli company that focuses on data centers and and the flash memory component in particular. And over the last couple of years, the explosion of data has obviously complicated things for the energy draw, and it's still just a couple percentage points of total energy consumption worldwide. But over the next couple of years, that explosion of data, especially through like IoT, is not slowing down, and it's just going to require more and more energy. Some estimates as high as 20%. So what Pliops does is they focus on making flash energy far more efficient by having, instead of breaking data apart, by having multiple entry points and allowing it to be found more easily, instead of having like thousands of queries over and over again to find the same chunks of data. And there's a lot of other areas that we're actively looking into. In regards to the energy space, we tend to do software investments that is a bit more closely aligned with the kind of trajectory VCs are looking for. And there's a lot of ways that, for example, machine learning or just good algorithms, whatever you want to call it, can be leveraged for. For example, we've looked at companies that are looking for ways to optimize the markets. They're looking to do price optimization better. And there's a big point that I think all of the development of and future rollout depends on is being able to optimize which revenue streams you're dealing with. Previously, all the operators had like a central operation scheme. So if you plugged a generator in, there would be a central operator that said you'll go on at this hour and shut down then. But because all of the grid has been, or most of the developed countries' grids have been decentralized, there's now all these market mechanisms and like 10 different revenue streams to pick from. How to optimize those revenue streams is going to be the difference between that marginal difference at each operator's final decision-making process. It's like, do I know how to make those 10 revenue streams work for my PV panel, for my set of wind assets, or is it going to, or do I go with the security of knowing that a gas plant is gonna feed into the market with like maybe the 2 or 3 revenue streams I know how to go with. So there's optimization on that side. There's also a really complicated area that both of you kind of talked about with batteries. So we've gotten to the point where batteries are battery efficiency anyway is kind of plateauing, and there's still a lot more development that can be done, but there's basically we can't iterate fast enough. And that's another point where I think algorithms can really push the barriers on how fast we're iterating the combination between cathode, anode, and filament, and figuring out what's the best choice and the best combination of those things long ahead of having to actually build it out. So those are a couple.
Okay. Well, we have like 9 minutes, so I would like to have your vision about something that everyone speaks, is the fact that when we talk about energy transition, some people think that energy transition is about 100% electric model. And I would like to know your opinion about what is happening with biogas and green hydrogen, and why do you think regulators are in several countries are not supporting more the development of these industries as they did with the renewables in the past? And if you think that these regulators are, that this is a matter of a short-term strategy, or just because they think that the future will be just 100% electrical. Because, for example, a plane or some freight transport initially is very difficult to be handled with just with electricity. So just.
Okay. Well, that's a pretty complex topic. Again, I think it depends on the market that you're operating in. So I'm more with Jose, I think, on the solar is probably one of the leading sources of power in the future going forward. In Japan, we have biomass and biogas and things, but the feed-in tariff on that, there's a feed-in tariff structure to make it economical. But again, it requires a fuel, and also in most cases, you're assuming there's an established grid, so that whatever you're generating, you're moving that across. I'm not a big fan of those sources of generation, but that's because I live in countries that have a lot of sun. And so I think that's just a better way to go, a more economical way. But it won't, I mean, the future is complex, and so you're not going to have just one source of generation. So taking into account different sources makes total sense. But again, what's the ideal ratio? It will depend on
the geography.
The geography.
Jose?
No, I agree with Jeff, really. In the short term, we may have different technologies. Hydrogen, I think, is one of them. But at the end, I think solar is the final solution. You know, you have the sun everywhere. It's distributed. It's decentralized. Is decarbonized, is digital. You know, solar and storage is the final. In the meanwhile, yes, for sure. Maybe for planes, you will need to have a solution because you cannot have so much batteries in the plane. But at the end, we will find a way. I think every computer, everything will have a solar panel in their base in order to capture the energy we have from the sun.
Owen, what do you think?
I tend to agree, and there's one important question that I always ask myself when it comes to biogas is it either like a natural source, like a garbage dump basically, that spits off methane, and if it's not, basically, there's usually not really a great long-term reason to do it, I don't think. And maybe there's other reasons to think that there are, but if you're using feedstock or anything else that could be either consumed or used by animals or used for probably another more specialized use case, the fact that there's like all this fungible energy from dozens of different sources kind of tilts it in the favor of whatever other specialized industry maybe can't get the same thing out of wheat that they can out of corn, for example, or something like that. And also, it just comes down to economics. It's really tough to plug in, to get a pipeline, let's say, all the way to a garbage dump if you're only spitting off a couple metric, or like a very small quantity of gas every once in a while, as opposed to connecting a pipeline to like an actual gas drilling site. And a clear example of how complicated building that infrastructure is like in the U.S., there was the shale gas revolution. So whether you like it or don't like it, it took years for them to get pipelines all the way to where the shale is being drilled. And so making that same case for biogas is even tougher.
Okay. I see your vision is very electric as well. I have a different opinion.
I do like it.
No, but it's just industry and other applications, like, and even mobility as well. To end, let's think in 2030, maybe 10 years, more or less. If we want to have 50, 60, 70% of renewable energy integrated in the grid, we will need to have some kind of flexibility. So today, we are starting with the virtual power plants and other technologies, and also flexibility, open new business models, like companies like Powen, to aggregate the excess of energy. I want to listen to your opinion and also what do you think about the peer-to-peer market for the energy sector? Because there are a lot of startups who speak about the peer-to-peer, but then we don't have a real market yet, real regulation. It's not legal sometimes.
So I've been looking at peer-to-peer for the last 4 years, invested in several companies that talked about it. I think peer-to-peer in a developed economy where you have already invested in the grid is a very difficult situation. Basically, it's not just the regulations. I mean, in most cases, actually all cases that I know of, you can't actually do it yet legally. So, for example, in Japan, what we would do is peer to retailer to peer, and where we try to step out of the picture as much as possible and not really kind of stand directly in between, and really use our company as a platform. But still, we're an intermediary because Tanaka-san can't sell directly to his neighbor.
And we know it's a kind of financial transaction. It's not a physical.
That's a paradigm that I think will happen in the future. I don't think 2030, at least for Japan, I don't think that will be the norm in Japan by that time. I think it's still going to take longer. On the other hand, in emerging economies, we've looked at for my other company where we're operating, we already have very rudimentary peer-to-peer in a sense. So, for example, a company in Bangladesh or a company in Cambodia, there might be a very small house with a single solar panel. And that panel produces more power in the middle of the day than the resident can use. And so what they've done in these cases is to pull wires to the neighbor's house. And the neighbors don't have panels. They don't have battery. But this way, they drop in a meter box, and the neighbor can now use the excess power. That is peer-to-peer at a very fundamental, very economic, there's a need. There's a real need there. So it makes total sense. I think that, therefore, that peer-to-peer is going to happen faster and develop faster and have a bigger impact in emerging markets. And that what we learn there, what we scale up there, what we perfect there, we can bring it back into the developed markets.
To which point do you see it possible in countries like Spain, for example?
I think in Spain, already using the support of the grid, you can do the peer-to-peer. You can sell electricity to your neighbor. You can have a plant in the south of Spain, a PV plant, and you can buy directly to the generator, so you can already do it.
But in a financial layer.
Well, I think this is almost there. I think in 5 years, really, I see the future absolutely with solar, more than 50%. Today, Australia is 20% of the generation in Australia is solar, and they are going to reach in 5 years 50%. In Germany is 18%, so it's there. Secondly, I see everybody in an electric vehicle. I always say that before we used to smoke in planes, in bars, and today no one smokes in a bar. We are going to walk in Madrid without smelling the smoke. And I think all this change is not because of the environment. It's not because we are more fancy. It's because it makes economic sense. And that's my conclusion on this.
I totally agree with your final conclusion, Jose. It's all about economics and what makes sense on a marginal plant-by-plant and installation-by-installation basis.
Okay. So we are done. And we have
12 seconds, no?
Yeah, fortunately, it's like. Okay, thank you everyone for coming.
Good to meet you, Jeff. Yeah, thanks.
María, gracias.
Ay.